All right. So first of all, any questions regarding the lab lectures inbox for lab 6? The instructors tried to explain for loops and while loops. Any questions after watching the videos? Okay, I'll quickly share my screen. Are you guys able to see my screen? Are you guys able to see? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
All right. So these are your lab 6 tasks. In total, we have 6 tasks. The first task says that write a Python program using for or while loop that can print the numbers that are divisible by 5 and between 1 and 51. Do you understand the problem? From the range 1 to 51, we have to print out all the numbers that are divisible by 5. And the sample output is given. So the number should be 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50. This is how we should print it. However, if you're thinking that we can simply use 10 print functions, print 5 first, print 10 second, that's not how it works. That's not how it's going to work. We have to use a while loop or a for loop. So first of all, let's see what happens when we use a for loop. So to use a for loop, you need to use the keyword for. Then you type in any kind of variable name. I'll just type in X. This is a variable name. You can choose anything you want. Then we have to type in another keyword called in range. Use the range function. So the range function can take 1 or 2 or 3 inputs. If you want to, let's say, print something 10 times, if you put 10 in the range function, let's say print hello. But what this is going to do is print hello 10 times. So instead of writing print hello, print hello 10 times, we can put it in a loop and set the range and run it for 10 times instead of writing the code manually. Let's quickly run this and see the output. So there you go. So these are this is an advantage of loops, so we don't have to repeat our code. Now, what happens when I try to print x instead of hello? X is the variable. Remember that. We defined it during the for loop. So in every iteration, when we're defining a for loop and setting the range to 10, that means what is within the for loop. That means what has been indented after the for loop. This line is within the for loop. This what is within the for loop will execute 10 times if the range is 10. So that means the value of x will increase every time. So if we run it like, if we just print x within the for loop, we get the value from 0 to 9. So by default, the value will start from 0 and it will run 10 times because we set the range to 10. So if it starts from 0, we get up to 9. That's 10 values from 0 to 9. So first, let's get this range. If we say 51 here, what do you think is going to happen? If we set the range 5 here, what do you think is going to happen? We're just printing x. So by default, if you don't set a starting value and only set the range, only set one input for range for the range function, it will start from 0 and reach up to that. It will not reach that number, but the number before. So when we put the range as 5, it's going to go from 0 to 4. That's 5 numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 0 to 4. Now, that means if we want to reach this range from 1 to 51, we cannot start with 0. So that's where the second input comes in. If you say 1 to 5, and to use multiple inputs or, or parameters in a range function, you have to separate them by a comma. So the first parameter or input says that start from this number. So if I say 1, it will start from 1 instead of 0. And if I keep the second attribute 5, it will print until 5, which is 4. So now when I ran this, it prints from 1, and before 5, it printed up to 4. So to achieve this range, you have to change this input to 52. That way it will go from 1 to 51, and we'll achieve this range. So now, not only achieving the range is enough. If we print it out, we will have from 1 to 51, actually 2 lines of code. But we have to print the numbers that are divisible by 5. We did something very similar in the last lab. So we to check if a number is divisible by something, what operator do we use? Do you remember?
So percentage.
Yes, it's called the mod operator, and the symbol is the percentage symbol. So if help me out here, how can I define? How can I determine if my x would be divisible by 5? X percentage x mod 5 should be equal to 0. For those of you who forgot what the percentage symbol stands for, it stands for the modulus operator, and what the modulus operator does is gives you the remainder. So if x mod 5 equals 0, that means if I divide x with 5 and get the remainder 0, that means x is divisible by 5, right? So 5 divided by 5, the remainder is 0. 30 divided by 5, the remainder is 0. So every possible divisible value, divisible by 5 value, the remainder should be 0. So now if I properly end the print, that means the print is within the if. So that means my loop will run from 1 to 51, all the numbers from 1 to 51, and if the number is divisible by 5, only then print. That way, I'll get the output like this instead of all the numbers. So let's run this code. So there you go. 5, 10, 15, all the way to 50. And it matches with the output perfectly. So this is the solution for your first task. Any questions, or you don't understand how the loop is working, or any questions? Okay, so let's move on to the second task. It says write a Python program for using for loop that can print the sum of odd numbers between 11 to 30. So again, we have a range. So we already know how to set a range like this. Now the challenge here is to print the sum of all the odd numbers. So we have to determine the odd numbers within this range and print their sums. So this is the sample output. I'll explain how the output shows up like this. So between 11 and 30, the first odd number is 11. So the first output should be 11. And when you find the second odd number, which is 13, you need to add both of the odd numbers that you found so far. So it was 11 plus 13, which should be 24. So then you go to then you go to 13, 14, and 15. So you find your third odd number, 11, 13, and 15. If you add all of them up, you'll get 39. Then you find 17. If you add all four of them, you'll get something like this. And if you go all the way to 29 and add all the odd numbers in between, you'll get the final value. So is the question clear? So let's try and solve this one as well. Again, we need to use a for loop. This time it's explicitly said in the question to use a for loop. For, again, I'll use the variable in x in range. First, let's set the range again. We have to start from 11 and go until 31. That means we'll have 11 to 30. The first thing we have to do is find odd numbers. Do we remember how to do that? Again, we have to use the modulus operator. So x mod 2 equal 0. This will give me even numbers. Because in even numbers, if I divide them by 2, I will get no remainder. They will be divisible by 2. So I don't want that. I want odd numbers. So instead of using equal, I'll use exclamatory equal. This means not equal. Or I can use equal 1. All the conditions are correct for finding odd numbers. It's completely up to you which one you use. First, let's determine if we were able to get all the odd numbers. So for now, I'll just print and see my output. My output should be 11, 13, 15, 17, all the way to 29. So 11, 13, 15, 7, all the way to 29. So we were successfully able to get the odd numbers. So now after getting the odd numbers, we have to add them up. So how can we do that? The problem with this loop is the value of x is changing on every iteration. On the first iteration, it's 11. On the second iteration, it's 13. So when we're at 13, we're losing the value 11. Within the loop, the only variable we have access to is x. And x is changing every time. So when x changes from 11 to 13, we lost the value 11 before. So that's the problem we're facing right now. So to store any kind of value, what do we use? The value, we use a variable, right? So what if we determine a variable, let's call it sum, and let's put an initial value 0. And after after getting an odd number, we can keep the value within the sum variable. Since the sum variable is outside the loop, it will not, and it is not initialized within the loop, it will not change during every iteration. The value will remain. So now I'm going to write something that might not be very clear to you at the So what I wrote is sum equals sum plus x. Now if you think about this mathematically, this is completely illogical. It doesn't make any sense. But in programming, when you're using the equal symbol, a single equal symbol, that means or you're assigning values. When you're using the equal symbol, first thing you have to do is look at the right side and calculate what is in the right side and then put it in the left side. So when I'm saying that sum equals sum plus x, first we have to calculate what is sum plus x. In the first iteration, my sum is 0 and my x should be 11. If it's an odd number, then it goes inside the if and my x should be 11. So 0 plus 11 should equal to 0. And I'm putting that 11, I'm sorry, 0 plus 11 should be 11, and I'm putting that 11 in the sum variable. So from now on, my sum is 11 instead of 0. And on the next turn, when I get x equals 13, my sum will be 11 and my x will be 13. So 11 plus 13, I'm going to get 24. And my sum will contain 24 next time. If you're having trouble understanding, print it out. So there you see, you get the exact output, the desired output. So again, what's going on is 11 plus 0 is 11. But on the second turn, sum is 11 and x will be 13. So 11 plus 13 will be 24. So on the third turn, my sum is 24 and then my x would be 15. So 15 plus 24 equals 39. So that's how it goes. If you have questions, you can ask. And if you are not comfortable with using this statement, you can think of it. You can break it down into two lines. You can say, let's take another variable called temp sum, temporary sum. This time, all I'm doing is adding the sum and x. And on the next line, I'm saying sum equals temp sum. So in the first iteration, it's going to be 0 plus x, which is 11. I'm keeping 11 in the temp sum, and I'm storing the value of temp sum in the actual sum. If breaking it down into two lines help you build your logic better, I would suggest you do that. Or if you were comfortable with the first approach, sum plus x, you can go for that as well. Both are correct. If I print this, I get the same output. So So do you understand how to solve task 2?
Yes, sir.
So the task 3 tells us that write a Python program using for or while loop that reads 10 numbers from the user and prints the average. So this time we're going to have to take 10 numbers from the user. So writing the input function 10 times isn't what we're trying to tell you to do. You're going to use a loop, and within the loop, you're just going to write it once and run the loop 10 times. And every time you're going to take a number from the user and calculate the sum, just like you did here. You have to take a variable sum, or you can take any other variable name. You should put it outside the loop so it doesn't. So you can keep the value. You get you can keep track of the sum, and then finally print out the average. So if you're taking 10 numbers, it's going to be sum divided by 10. So can you do it, or should I help you out? If you want to give it a try on your own, then I'll leave it there. Or if you think that it's confusing to you, I'll help you out. Um, uh, Make sure to use a floating number because we're calculating the average. Actually, let me just do this one for you. So, okay. Another thing is we should use a for or a while loop. So it's giving us an option this time. So let's use a while loop this time. Since we already saw a few examples for for loops, I'll do this for a while loop. That way you'll have a better understanding of while loop and this test. So to use a while loop, first you need to initialize a variable before the loop. Let's say I'm taking a variable called count equals 1. And to use a while loop, first we have to use keyword while, and then we have to use some kind of condition. Just like in the if function, we use the condition within the first bracket. Here it is. This returns true or false. Similarly, for a while loop, we have to use a condition that returns true or false. And as long as that condition is true, the loop will keep running. So if I say if my count is less or equal to 10, print count. Now, the thing with while loops is if you run your program now, you'll be stuck in an endless loop or an infinite loop because your count is 1. It will always be less or equal to 10 because you're not changing any values for the count. So it will keep printing count until forever. So you have to be very careful about loops, especially while loops, because you have to manually change the value of the variable that you initialized and you used for the while statement, the while condition. So count plus count plus 1. So this time it will be a finite loop because I'm updating the value of count. So after printing, I'm saying that count should be count plus 1. That means if count was 1, it should be 1 plus 1 equals 2. So next time it should be 2. And after that, it should be 3. So all the way when it's up. And when it's 10, it's going to check if is 10 less or equal to 10. It is equal to 10, so it will still print. And then my count will be 11. and then it will go back to the while statement and check the condition. Is 11 less or equal to 10? No. Then it will exit the loop automatically. So let's print and verify if this is the case. So there you go. It starts from 1, it prints 1, and until it's less or equal to 10, it keeps printing the value of count. So as soon as it's 11, it exits the loop and ends the program. So that's how you can set ranges in the while loop. In this case, we have to take 10 numbers, so we have to ensure that our loop runs 10 times. So that's what I just did. I printed from 1 to 10, just to ensure our loop runs for 10 times. Now we have to take a user input. Let's name the variable user input. And since we're calculating the average, we have to divide it by 10. So it's wiser if you take the floating, if you cast your input into floats instead of integers. If you don't remember what casting means, is when you use an input function in Python, it will always return a string. But we cannot do any mathematical operations with a string. So we have to always convert it or cast it to an integer or a float. So in this case, I'm going to be using the float. So use the float function, and within that, take the input. That way, your number will be converted into a floating point number. So please enter a number. So another thing is, since we're since we're since we need to calculate the sum, we need to take another variable outside the loop. Let's call the sum again, and initialize it with 0. Times sum equals the previous value of sum plus the user input now. Hold on, someone's trying to join. The user input. So it's very similar to what we did in a previous example. So again, if you're not comfortable with this line, you can break it down to 2. So that way we can keep track of the sum. Now, if we have the sum, later on we need to calculate the average. So we have to go past the loop, we have to exit the loop. And notice when I press enter, the indentation remains. So that means Python still thinks that I want to be within the loop. So this again, indentation is very important in Python. To exit the loop, you have to press a backspace on your keyboard. After that, you can see that this is perfectly aligned, the while statement and your current cursor. That means you're outside the while loop. So when we're done with the loop and we're exiting the loop, then we print the average. So since we have the sum, all we have to do is divide it by 10. So that's pretty much it. Let's try it out if our code works or not. Let's use the sample inputs. Say 5, 8. Oops. Let's say what kind of error we're facing. It's saying that user input is not defined. Oh, I misspelled user input. I said user input. All right, so let's try that again. 5, 8, 13, 25. I'm just using the sample inputs. 4, 32, 11, 7, 8, 10. So there you see my average is 12.3, which matches with the sample output 12.3. Try to always follow the exact output format. So in this case, we should also write this before printing the average. So how can we do that? We simply put it in a string, and to separate them, we use comma. So there you go. That's your entire solution with a string. Any questions?
I got only one.
Uh, Sorry, you got what?
So when I did the average, it's not 12.5.
Did you take different inputs? I mean, if you take different inputs, you're going to get a different
No,
value.
exactly the same.
Your final result is 4.5.
Only 1.0.
Okay, so what you're doing is you're not calculating the sum properly. Could you check this line?
So sum equal to sum. Oh yeah, it's equal.
How I was able to determine your problem is because if you divide 10 by 10, it's going to give you 1.0. So the last input is 10, and you're saying you got your average is 1.0. So I figured out that since you're not probably calculating the sum or keeping track of the sum,
Yes,
and
I'm
you
still
lose in the
doing.
piece. Yeah. So does it work now?
Mm, yes, sir.
Any confusions or questions how this code is working? It's important you understand how it works rather than just copying me because I'm not going to do all the tasks. Want to leave some for you just to check if you understood how these things work. All right. So any questions regarding test 3? We saw examples of for loops, and now we saw examples of while loops. So the next task tells us to use a while loop. This time we don't have an option. We have to use a while loop that prints all the numbers from 1 to 30. So again, we have to take a range. This time, if we use the count variable again, we have to check if the count is less or equal to 30 that are divisible by 3 or 5. So within the loop, we have to check all the numbers and print the numbers that are divisible by 3 or 5. So 3 will be printed, 5 will be printed, 6 will be printed because it's divisible by 3. So either divisible by 3 or divisible by 5 or divisible by both, like 15. 15 is divisible by 3 as well as 5. So do you understand the problem? So all I'm going to do here is help you out on how you can check if a number is divisible by 3 or 5. So I'm not going to write the while loop. You can take help from this code, and then all you have to do is determine the range if the range is properly set. All I'm going to do is help you out what you have to do within the while loop. So within the while loop, you have to check if it's divisible by 3 or 5. In the very first task, we checked if it was divisible by 5 like this. If x mod 5 equals 0, that means it's divisible by 5. All we have to do here is check for both if it's divisible by 3 or 5. So we have to use an if function, and let's say let's put my let's say my x is 12 for now. X mod 3 equals 0. This means it's divisible by 3. And then you can simply type in the keyword or. Then you can write a condition if it's divisible by 5. As simple as that. Divisible by 3 or divisible by 5. Then print. Again, I'm taking a manual value and assigning it to x. You won't be doing that. You'll be using a loop, and you'll start from 1 to 30. And each time you'll have to check this. So in this case, it should print x since it is divisible by 3. If I change this to 11, it's not going to print anything because it's not divisible by 3 or 5. If I change this to, let's say 20, it is divisible by 5, but not 3. So one of the conditions is satisfied in an OR function. If any or both conditions are satisfied, then the entire thing is true. So for 20, since it is divisible by 5, it prints it out. And for 15, which is divisible by 3 and 5, it should also print out 15. But for something like 16, it's not going to print out anything. So do you understand the idea? So this is not the entire solution. You have to use a while loop and this range and check this condition for all the values. So any questions regarding task 4, or if you're confused about something? Okay, so moving on to task 5, write a Python program using for loops. This time is specific that we have to use a for loop that reads a number from the user and prints the multiplication table of that number up to 10. So if the user inputs 2, the output should be 2 times 1 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, 2 times 6, 2 times 3 is 6, 2 times 4 is 8. So the entire multiplication table up to 10. So 2 times 10 is 20. Now how can we do that? First of all, we have to make sure, let's try and determine how we can achieve this. How many times do we have to run the loop? Let's try to break down the problem. First, we have to take a user input. We only have to take one input, so we don't have to put that in a loop. We can simply take a user input, and then we have to calculate the multiplication table. So let's say the user input's 5. So our output should be 5 times 1 is 5, 5 times 2 is 10, 5 times 3 is 15, and so on all the way to 50. So how can we achieve that using a loop? No matter what the user inputs, we have to print out 10 numbers. So we can, based on that assumption, we can ensure that our loop should run 10 times. So if we're using a for loop, again, if I name my variable x in range, we have to Make sure the loop runs 10 times. If I do this, we're ensuring it runs 10 times. However, it starts from 0 to 9. If we take a user input, user input, I'll take an integer this time since we're not dividing anything. If we take the user input and use that within the loop and multiply it by x, should we get our multiplication table? What do you think? We have to multiply the user input from 1 to 10, right? Because if the user input is 2, 2 times 1 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4. So in every iteration, all we're doing is increasing the number. 2 times 2 is 4. If we increase it by 1, it will be 3. 2 times 3 is 6. If we increase it by 1, it should be 3 plus 1 equals 4. So 2 times 4 is 8. So do you understand the approach? The problem if I put 10 in the range function is it starts from 0. And now if I try to say the user input times x, it's not going to give me the proper result because in the first iteration it will multiply it by 0. So even if I give 2 input, the first output is going to be 0. It's not going to be 1. So how can we change that? Let me just quickly show you the output I will get. So it says that 0 to 4 and it's missing 20 at the very bottom. So the only problem here is we're starting from 0 and ending it with 9. So if we update our range and start from 1 and end with 10, then our multiplication table is complete. Can anybody tell me how we can achieve that? If I put 10 in the range function, it automatically starts from 0 and ends to 9. All I have to do is change the range. We have to start from 1 and end at 10. Can anybody tell me how we can achieve that? We saw a very similar example. If we can test too.
So is it 1 comma 10?
If you go from 1 comma 10, it will start from 1, but it will end at 9.
Okay.
So how can we make sure if it ends at 10? The second input is up to this number. It doesn't use this number uh, up to this number. So if it's 1 comma 10, it's going to go from 1 to 9. So instead of 10, what can we write to make sure it goes to 10?
11.
Yeah, 11. So there you go. Your multiplication table is complete. If I there you go. It goes from 1 to 10, and your multiplication table is complete. Now, if we let's say give a big number, so you have the multiplication table for 7956. So it doesn't matter what kind of input the user gives. With this code, you can have the multiplication table for any number. So these are some examples of how powerful loops are. So with simple 3 lines of code, we can calculate the multiplication table for any number. uh, all these tasks, they're not very, the solutions are not very big. But if you try to do them manually, if you try to go through, let's say, the range between 1 to 51 and try to print all the numbers individually, your code will be huge. And it will be a manual calculation. So if someone changes the range, you'll have to rewrite the code entirely. But with using loops, you can do it using like three lines. And if your range does update later on, let's say the range is updated to 1 to 71, all you have to do is change the value here from 52 to 72. So that's why loops are very important and very convenient, and they're widely used for problems. So both for loops and while loops are important, and based on the scenario, whichever is more convenient, we go for that one. But in this task, some of the tasks say that you have to use a for loop for this, you have to use a while loop for this, and in some tasks, you're giving the option to choose any one you want, like this, for all or while. So we're done with task 50, task 5, sorry. And all we have is task 6. So this one, it says that write a Python program that uses a while loop. So again, you're fixed with a while loop. You cannot use a for loop in this case. That reads a number and the text from the user. So it will take two things from the user. First, it will read a number. If you look at the sample input, first it reads the number and then it will read any kind of text. So it first takes 4 in the sample input and it reads the text. Bingo, last CSE101, the assignment is done. And after taking these inputs, the program should print the text as many times as the number. So in the sample input case, since the number is 4, we'll print this text 4 times. So your output should be printing this 4 times. If the number was, let's say, 7, it should print this 7 times. So it should be dynamic. The user can input any number. If the user inputs 100, your code should print 100 times. So in this approach, what we have to do is first of all, take two inputs, use the input function, and make sure for the number to use the int function or the float function to make sure the number string is converted into a number. So later on, you can use that number to run your loop. So if the user inputs 4, your loop should run 4 times. If the user inputs 10, your loop should run 10 times. So the user input this time should be your condition for while loop. You should use the condition based on the user input. So the only change is going to be you do need a count variable, and you're going to check it if it's less or equal to the user input. That's the only difference. Instead of fixed 10 or 20 or 5, this will be the user input. So that way you have a dynamic loop. If the user input is 4, it will run 4 times. If the user input is 10, it will run 10 times. And secondly, you have to take any kind of string. So just using the input function is enough here. And then within the loop, just print the string. So I want you to do this on your own. I already gave you some ideas how you should. And if you still have questions, you can ask. Or if you have any other questions regarding any other task, you can ask that as well. Again, before you click on the form and go to the folder file. The first thing you should do is make a copy on your drive. Make a copy on drive because all the code I'm writing here is not going to be saved. This you cannot save changes because this folder file is not for you. This folder file will not belong to you. That's why you cannot save changes. So before writing any kind of code, the first thing you should do is copy it in your drive and then write out code. So if you don't have any questions, I think we're done. If you do face questions or come to any kind of issues later on, you can always reach me in Slack. And this is lab 6. This is the final lab. We don't have any labs after this one. So this is actually our last official lab class. So did you enjoy the lab classes? Any kind of feedback? How did you how do you feel about programming or Python in general? Was it too difficult, or were you able to grasp? And this is important feedback because this is the first time we're actually introducing programming in CSE101. And for students who are for non-CS students, practically, learning a programming language can be a bit difficult. So I wanted to know about your feedbacks. If you found it difficult, or did you find it fun, or any kind of feedback?
It's not that much difficult. It was fun.
All right. Saba, you want to say something? Was Python difficult for you, or were you able to handle it? All right. Anyway, so your lab 6 is due on 19th September. So please make sure to submit it within the deadline. Any submissions after the deadline will be counted as late submissions. So you won't get full marks even if you get everything correct.
Okay, sir.
All right. For those of you who still haven't submitted lab 5, please do it by tonight, 11:59 p.m. And I think that's all I have to say. So it was a fun ride. I hope you enjoyed Python. And if
Yes, sir.
uh,
Thank
yeah, you're welcome. And if you do want to further your knowledge by chance, if you're actually interested in programming, there are a lot of free available Python courses on the internet, or there are also YouTube videos that explain Python code. Or um, you can even reach out to me if you want. If I'm free, I'll help you out. So in case you want to further your studies of Python. So that's it from me. Any last questions? If you do come across any issues or questions, make sure to reach me on Slack. So that's me signing off. Thank you guys. You've been a wonderful audience, and I was I, I'm I'm delighted to be your lab instructor. I hope I was able to explain Python and you were able to understand how it works.
you. We are glad also.
And thank you very much. Okay. So
Thank
take
you,
care.
sir.
Yeah.
Assalamualaikum.
Understand.
So thank
Take care.